Thank you, Mary. So I am Patsy Underhill Turner. I live in DeKalb County. I was born in Cottage Home, Tennessee. I'm one of 5 children of Sheila and Cora Owen Patterson Underhill. The youngest, I'm the youngest. The oldest child was born in 1932. So he was 22 years old. He died when he was 4. And so then my other brother, John Underhill, was born in 36. Then Jack Underhill was born in 39. Then Joyce in 44, and then me in 55. So I got into wondering about my grandmother's mother's name. My grandmother, Martha Owen, her mother had a really weird name. It was Cena. So I asked her one day how did she come about her name, and she said she didn't know. She couldn't tell me because my grandmother Martha was born in 1893, and her mother had died before 1900. So she had no clue about her mother. She knew she was raised by the Smithson sisters, who all lived on Pea Ridge and in Cannon County, because they were her half sisters. And so I started digging, and then I started going to the library in Smithville. And then like I said, like Mary said, I met Joreen Parsley, who had done all of the DeKalb County census records. She had did a DeKalb County marriage book from 1849 to 1950, and we had all those valuable records. And then, of course, everybody knows who Tommy Webb is. DeKalb County wouldn't be DeKalb County if it wasn't for Tommy Webb. But Tommy was very instrumental in the genealogy books, and he also kept up with cemeteries all through his youth. He loved cemeteries. So he and a bunch together, somewhere around 1984, 85, they decided they were all compiling the same cemetery. So they got together, and Doris Gilbert printed a DeKalb County cemetery book. That cemetery book compiled, it had 324 cemeteries that we found in DeKalb County. 70 of those are still used today. We have got 10 more added since then. They're behind houses. They're in somebody's front yard. We have found cemeteries in lots beside people's houses where the family said, yeah, there's a cemetery out there. If you want to go look at it, go ahead. But we turned the cows and the pigs and the chickens in years ago, so all the stones aren't readable anymore. So I had a lady contact me from Missouri to tell me that her great-grandfather was buried there, and she gave me dates. And so that's the only way that we knew that they were there. But had it not been for Tommy deciding to do this project, a lot of these cemeteries would be lost. And, of course, we all remember back this past year whenever they had the flood down in East Tennessee and Carolina, how it wiped all those cemeteries away. All those churches were gone. If those cemeteries and those churches and the people in the county didn't have records, there's not going to be no record for years of who's buried somewhere. So our DeKalb County cemetery book was very important. Well, I said, somebody needs to do a new one because these people died. This was in 2000. Well, Joreen said, okay. She said, you do it. And I was like, what am I going to do it with? Well, she goes out and gets me an old computer. She refurbishes it, and I set out. Every afternoon after I would leave the shirt factory with my pencil and my piece of paper, I'd take off to a cemetery somewhere in the county or the edge of the county. I went all the way to Short Mountain to Gunner Grizzle Cemetery. I compiled the whole thing. I went to White County to Peel Chestnut, and I did it, even though they were in another county. But those counties have people that are buried in those cemeteries that belong to everybody related to people in DeKalb County. Prosperity, Wilson County. I mean, we've got people. I've got a great grandfather that's buried there. He was a Smith. They were one of the first settlers in Tennessee. So I can say that. That's where Smith Fort came from. So I started doing it, and then I compiled my first cemetery book somewhere around that year, and I had help. I had a great lady named Mary Hughes who indexed that book for me. So then the next book I did it around 2005, and what I did was, like, just say my dad was still alive, and if I walked through the cemetery and my mother was still living, but my daddy didn't have a rock when the first cemetery book was compiled, I would write his name down, when he was born, when he died, put a little check mark out of it, put rock, just like the Cannon County Cemetery book people did when they compiled their cemetery books. And then I would put wife, Cora Owen Patterson, and her birth date, and put not dead. Well, then if there was a person that only had a funeral home marker, I would put FMH so that we knew it was a funeral home marker. So then when we go back and do the next book, that rock would probably be down, and so it would carry on. So that's kind of how we did. It was an update. It wasn't the same, but it was an update. So then when you walk through a cemetery, the first thing that you see usually when you see a name and a date, a death date and a birth date, is you see an epitaph. Epitaphs are cool, some of them are. Most of them that you see are gone but not forgotten. Then you'll see please remember me. Then you'll see, sleep little baby, or here lies a great man, or something of that, and always and forever. So I thought, well, that's just cool. When I die, I think I would like for somebody to put on my tomb rock, gone but not forgotten. Please remember me, always and forever. I think it's just neat. So after I did finish the third book, which was Please Remember Always and Forever, in 2005, I quit for a few years and I didn't do anymore. But yet I still had the bug. I'm still out going through cemeteries. I'm still writing down dead people. And I work with all four of the funeral homes in DeKalb County. We have a really close relationship. If somebody dies, the gravedigger will call and say, hey, Patsy, do you know we've got so-and-so going in at this cemetery over here? And I'll say, yeah, which funeral home are they at? So I'll call the funeral home and I'll bug the daylights out of them. And then they'll tell me. Or we've even had people come in from other counties around and other states and go to a funeral home and ask, can you tell me where my great so-and-so's buried at? Well, no, we can't because we don't know. They died in 1940. We didn't bury them. But we know somebody's got a cemetery book. So here's her phone number. Call her. So I kind of work with them, and we help each other out and do that. I had funeral home, the gravedigger called me yesterday and asked me if I knew a lady was going to be buried Saturday in Brush Creek, which is in Smith County. And I said, what's her name and when did she die? And he said, well, she died this week. And I said, okay, just a minute. And I come back and I said, no. I said, she actually died in November of 2024. And I said, she's going to be cremated. And I said, they're going to have a funeral at a later date. He said, you're right, probably. He said, but they didn't tell me all that. So, but we kind of help each other along. And I've got shoe boxes, and I've got photo albums of obituaries that I have collected over the years. I have consistently since 97 cut every obituary out of the newspaper that it was printed in DeKalb County, and I have got all those in shoe boxes. So I kind of can say that I know where they're buried at. This is DeKalb County. Of course, it's a great big county. When Mr. Webb started on the cemetery book, he started at Alexandria with number 1, and he went all the way down and all the way around the lake and came back down through Smithville and came back out and actually stopped way over here. So then the biggest cemetery that we have is Salem, of course, at Liberty, and it has 3,429 burials in it. Then DeKalb Memorial Gardens, which is out close to Horton Springs and Smithville, it has 3,236, and then Horton Springs has 2,787. Prosperity actually has 1,169 that we know of. Years ago, I was fortunate enough to get a hold of the list that a lady had done at Prosperity Cemetery, and I actually updated that for a while. But this is all of our cemeteries. Out of all the 324, we only have 29 that has a church house sitting beside the cemetery, which is interesting. About 20 years ago, I had a lady and a man come to my house, and they asked me if I could help him find his mother. Her name was Emma Drew Hittleball. It was such a weird name. I knew instantly it was not a DeKalb County name. He said, I was in the hospital when she died, and we don't know where she's buried at. He said, they told us that she was buried at the old church house cemetery out in the country. And I said, that could be anywhere. I said, give me just a minute. So I go back in the house, and I come back out, and I said, I'll tell you where she's at. Come on, I'll show you. So I got in the truck, and up the road I went, and it was just at Bank Cemetery, which was just up the road from my house. And I walked straight to her grave, and he got out. And he walked over to it, and he stood there for just a minute, and he got back in the car, and he said, I'm ready to go. They come from Colorado. And I'm like, okay. So the lady said, give me your name and your phone number and your address. And I got the nicest letter from them 2 weeks later thanking me for showing him where his mother was buried because he had no idea. He said, I was in the hospital, and I was sick, and I couldn't come. But he said, I have closure now, and I know. And they sent me $20. And they said, you've helped us so much. And I was like, wow. But it was just, I don't know. It's just, I'm one of these people that if I can help somebody, I will. He says, I need to set up a shop, Hey, Joreen said one time, she said, we could find Sam Walton. She said, we could find anybody. And I said, yeah. I said, but you got to have to be kind of a little FBI to know how to find people. I said, you got to have a little information. So this little map down here is where all the graves were moved whenever they formed Center Hill Lake in 1948. And of course, everybody's heard of Under the Lake book that was done in DeKalb County by 3 ladies over there. And their book sold out just instantly like that. But all those graves were moved, and most of them were moved over to Mount Holly, which is over on the backside of Smithville next to the golf course. But this is a list of all of our cemeteries. It's very hard sometimes to be able to go to one of these little cemeteries that is behind the house because people don't want you in their property no more, and you have to ask. And we have a cemetery on our property at the end of our farm, and it's on dead end road, and it's anybody in public can go visit that cemetery, and all hours of the day and night. There's people down there all the time visiting. I don't know what they're doing down there at that time of night. No one knows. But somewhere around 2008, I joined Find a Grave. I thought it was wonderful because I could sit there at the house, and I was like Mr. Tipton that started it. I could visit all over the country, and I could go see all the famous people that I wanted to get out and travel to, and couldn't go see their graves and everything. But then I kind of found that some of the information was wrong. I thought, okay, I didn't do anything. I didn't put the first memorial on until 2016. And I thought, I retired in 2016 from work. I had worked 50-something years at a shirt factory in and out of DeKalb County. So another friend of mine, she taught me into starting to put memorials on. So with my little obituaries that I had, I set to work. I started setting out, and I started working on that. So then I talked him into going with me to the cemeteries. So we got involved in mapping DeKalb County cemeteries. We only have one office in the whole county that has one cemetery in the whole county that has an office that they can tell you who is buried in what plots. Nobody else has an office, and hardly any of them have people that knows who takes care of them, much less has them out. So Horton Springs, the biggest one, we took a year. This has been about 3 years ago, and he had his little clipboard, and away he went, and I had my clipboard, and we got the entire whole cemetery done. We went back and we took the camera, and we have got a photo of every stone that is in that cemetery. So if somebody calls and says, hey, where is Aunt so-and-so and so-and-so buried at, we can tell them. The gravedigger calls me sometimes and says, hey, I need to bury somebody over here. But the family says they're over here across the road. Well, what's their name? Okay, they're Cathcarts. No, they're not over here. They're over here. How do you know that? I said, they got a daughter that's buried over here. The mom and daddy's already got a tomb rock up. They're buried over there. Go to the telephone pole, go 13 rows back, go down about 6 graves, and you're right there. He's like, okay, good. But we got to work together. So then back to Find a Grave. So then we started adding photos. We started going, we go at least once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week to a cemetery somewhere so I can take a picture of a headstone that I know that somebody's been newly buried, or if I know that there's been a tombstone set up, I will go take a picture of it and put it on Find a Grave. And I also have started a lot of the older Find a Grave memorials that you find that have the older photos on them from like 2008, 10, 11, and such as that. You can take a new picture now and put it on it and compare those pictures, and it's remarkable at the difference in those stones because the elements of time is eating those stones away. So I think that's very important. And also, too, we found out something the hard way. When we first started, we thought, just take a picture of just that little name, and stick it on there. Well, then when you have somebody call you and say, we can't find it in the cemetery, you think, man, why didn't I take a better picture? Why didn't I stand back here and take a picture of it over there? And it's got all these other stones standing back here. It's got a tree back here. Prosperity, it had all them beautiful trees, they're gone now. They cut them all down but one, so you ain't going to find no stones in there unless you just happen to know where it's at. We drove through there a while ago. We was talking about how naked it looks. But that's important too. And then vandalism. You have so much that you see on TV where people are going through cemeteries and these people just knock them down, tear them up. So if it's not documented, and God forbid that we have a natural disaster like they had where it wipes an entire cemetery out, we would all be in a mess if it were not for cemetery books and people that actually volunteer to do things like that. So Find a Grave can be good, but then like Mary said, you've also got people out there that just want to say, oh yeah, Joe Bogle was my grandfather. He was my great grandfather. This is his wife. Her name is Elvira. I know it's Elvira. Link them up. And you're like, but that's not right. And you can't make these people understand that that's not right. So an obituary is really good because it does show. Funeral home records are awesome. They do have that. Census records are very important, and marriage records. So you got to kind of sit down and you got to go through the whole thing. And of course, if you have ancestry, your Find a Grave is already linked to your ancestry, so that does provide a lot of information. It's really good, but still, though, you got to check it. And then a lot of people use Family Search for adding to Find a Grave, and that's, to me, that's terrible because I found my own great grandmother married to my own brother on Family Search, and I had to go through and I had to explain this to somebody, and then they had changed my father's name from Sheely to Sheila, and I said, he ain't a Sheila. I said, I've got his birth certificate and I've got his death certificate. So I said, it's spelled Shelie. I said, he'd turn over in his grave had he known this. So you've really got to pay attention, and you've got people that are in other states. We have a man that lives in California that does a lot of Find a Grave in DeKalb County, and he started back before we got involved, and he said, well, I know these people. I'm kin to these people. And I'm like, how are you kin to them? And he's like, well, I'm just kin to them. I've been to DeKalb County, and I stayed all night with this woman at her house. And I'm like, well, how are you kin? Well, I don't know, he said. And he's claimed kin to everybody in DeKalb County. So he's kind of one of these that you kind of have to watch. But like I said, it is a great thing. So then also, if you don't find us in a cemetery somewhere, we're on a farm. We've got a little farm. We've got a dog and a cat who are 14 and 9, and we've got hummingbirds, and we got deers, and we got turkeys, and we got all kinds of wildlife. And then in DeKalb County, we're fortunate enough now that we have a new lady named Chris Wheeler who's sitting behind the desk. She has started our DeKalb County genealogy group up, and so we're excited about what she's going to be able to do with us. She's helped already with our first families in DeKalb County. My great-granddaughter, who was 2 in May, she has 4 certificates of the first families of DeKalb County, and she had those before she was 2 years old. So she can prove who she is. She's somebody. And then we have also started in DeKalb County the new DeKalb County Historical Society. have to get that right. Society. And it is, I'm sure some of you know, but it is going to be run by the chairman, who is William Freddie Curtis, who was the director for Cannon County Schools. And so we're excited to be able to get our historical society up. There's quite a few people that is interested in it, and we're all kind of involved in genealogy, and you can't be involved in genealogy and dead people if you ain't involved in historical stuff. So it kind of all goes together and kind of goes hand in hand, and we're kind of all excited and looking forward to that. So if any of y'all ain't doing anything, when the first Tuesday night of every month, September 2nd, we welcome y'all to come to Smithville. It's at the community center. It starts at 6 or 7? 6, I think. Yeah. But anyway, we have a lady that's going to do a presentation next month on the history of DeKalb County. So that will be interesting. And then the next month, we're going to have Dr. Van West. I'm excited to hear him because I've not heard him. I've heard great things about him. I don't know who he is, but I'm sure that I'll have a lot in common with him. So that's who I am, and like I said, I do DeKalb County Cemeteries, genealogy, and if you need to know where anybody's buried at, you can always holler at me. If I can't tell you, I can find somebody that can. And thank y'all for listening, and appreciate being here. And thank you, Mary.
Are you a volunteer, or do you get paid?